Welcome back to yet another canal adventure. You rejoin us here on our journey through Milton Keynes in just one day. We're going to do something slightly different in this vlog. We're going to tell you a story about this stretch of the Grand Union Canal. It's a tale with a twist that was discovered by Sheridan, who runs the Canalside Properties UK website, as she was doing a piece of research about the area. This is a true story, as reported in newspapers and official records from the time. Now, I know you might be thinking that you've already heard the story about the pub at Wootton-on-the-Green and Dick Turpin the Highwayman. It's been told in many a boat tuber's vlog. Well, this is not that story. It's a completely different one. We'd like to thank Sheridan for allowing us to use her research and text from her blog. A link will be added to the description below so you can read the story on the Canalside Property website. But before we tell you the story, here's a heron. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. It was early in the morning on Monday the 19th of July 1880 when a pair of horseboats loaded with chalk left from Stoke Hammond Lock, where they had stopped overnight. The crew for the first boat were an 18-year-old called George Macy, who was driving the horse, and then there was a 22-year-old named John Twist, who was steering the boat. On the second boat was the master of the two boats, John Birch, who had been born in Stoke Prior in 1818. John had had a wife named Matilda, who had unfortunately died a few years before this tale, and John was left to care for his two youngest children, Emily 10 and William, who was 8 years old. On this journey it is documented that John's daughter was driving the horse and his son was steering the boat, both children learning the family trade. Both boats proceeded north up the Grand Union Canal. At Fenny Stratford they stopped, so that the crews could eat their breakfasts on board. Shortly before setting off after breakfast, George Macy and John Twist swapped places for a while, so that John could drive the horse and George could steer the boat. At the next bridge they swapped back. John was now steering again. At about 7:30 a.m. the boats reached Wootton Bridge near Wootton-on-the-Green, where John called to George to get back on the boat as he wanted to go over the hedge. Now, we're not sure if that was an euphemism or not. If you know what that means, let us know in the comments below, but please keep it clean. As the boat was passing through the bridge hole, John Twist jumped off the first boat onto the towpath and stood against the wall of the bridge as the boat continued onwards. George did not witness John going over the hedge, but he expected John to rejoin him and the boat at the next bridge. However, as the second boat drew level with John Twist, he called out to his employer, "Gaffer, I shall leave you here." "Very well, you'd better come and take the 2 or 3 halfpence due to you," Birch replied. "Never mind the halfpence," said Twist. "I shall not go any farther with you." Both boats continued on their way, leaving John Twist still standing against the wall of the bridge. After about 5 minutes, Birch's son, William, who was steering the second boat, called out to his father, "Father, Twist has jumped into the bridge hole." Birch looked back, but could not see Twist. George had heard the shout and also looked back, but he couldn't see John either. He couldn't get off the boat straight away. The boats needed to be brought to a stop. The best place to alight from the boat would be at the next bridge, and that is where they headed. The next bridge was 18 chains further on. This is where they stopped. The use of chain as a measurement of length has mostly now been replaced by either imperial or metric measurements, but just so you know, the length of a chain is 66 feet, and that's also the distance between 2 cricket wickets. So the boats travelled on for another 1,180 feet, or in metric 360 metres. They travelled to the next bridge before they stopped and were able to alight from the boats. They then headed back to the bridge where Twist had jumped into the bridge hole. Birch grabbed his boat hook and walked back with Macy to the spot where Twist had jumped into the water. 10 more minutes had passed by the time they got there. There was nothing on the bank belonging to John Twist, and there was no sign of John in the water. Birch began dredging the canal with his boat hook, while Macy went in search of a policeman. After about 15 minutes, Twist's body was recovered, a short distance from the bridge, and Birch pulled it out onto the bank. John Twist was dead, and there was nothing anybody could do for him. P.C. Lawton arrived after Birch had pulled John's body onto the bank of the canal. They decided to transport the body to the Swan Inn at Wootton. That's the pub that's now called Ye Old Swan. Now you may think that's the end of our story, but it's not. Here's the twist. When John's body had been recovered from the canal, his legs were tied together with a cord, and a sack had been pulled over his head. Due to the circumstances, an inquest was required to determine the cause of death, and we'll find out what happened at the inquest after this piece of music. On Tuesday afternoon an inquest was held before J. Worley, Esquire, the coroner, and a respectable jury, of which a William Higgins was foreman. John Birch was sworn in. He said that he lived at Stoke Prior, Worcestershire, and that he was a boatman. He said that John Twist had been employed by him regularly for about 4 months, and was paid per voyage, and that his pay was advanced as he required it, and he was also supplied with food. He did not know whether John Twist was his true name, but he only knew him by that name. He estimated that John Twist was about 22 years of age. He knew nothing of his friends, but believed he came from Birmingham. Birch said that he did not see Twist tying his legs, but he must have tied them himself, as nobody was with him. He said that Twist had never stayed behind before, but he didn't think Twist was going away because he didn't have his coat or hat on, and had left some of his clothes on the boat. The next witness was George Macy, who was from Stoke Prior. He had known John since the beginning of the last winter. He said that he had recognised the cord. It had been in the boat cabin before John got out of the boat, but he did not see John taking it. It must have been in his pocket, he added. Then George admitted that John had spoken to him about taking his own life on the previous Saturday, but George had thought he was joking. That Saturday night John had slept with his clothes on, but that was not unusual. He had done it on other occasions. He added that John used to drink heavily, but he had been teetotal on the last 2 voyages, and always seemed cheerful. He could think of no reason why John would want to kill himself, and they did not suspect that he was thinking of committing suicide. The next witness was a shepherd's son, Thomas Divham, who was 10 years old, and lived at Great Wallstone. He said that he was going down to a field near the canal at about 8 a.m. He had seen a boatman dragging the body of a man partly out of the water. He could see that his legs were tied and a bag was over his head. Thomas saw the boatman pull the bag off, but he did not stop to see the body pulled onto the bank. The coroner addressed the jury, saying that Thomas's statement differed somewhat from the previous evidence, but it was clear that John Twist drowned himself, and it was for the jury to decide what state of mind he was in when he committed the act. This was because, in those days, suicide was a crime, and the only defence was temporary insanity. The jury returned a verdict of fellow DC, a felony against himself, by saying that he was guilty of taking his own life. He would forfeit his property to the Crown and would be buried in shame. John's body was duly buried without funeral rites later that evening. His death was registered in Newport Pagnell. According to the press, there was a great deal of local gossip about the case. It was said that if the boatman had returned to the spot sooner, John's life might have been saved. Did John Twist really commit suicide? Or did John Birch get off the boat, let his children carry on without him, and commit murder? Or was someone else involved? What do you think happened? In this vlog we have travelled southwards under the 5 bridges that lead to Wootton-on-the-Green, and have made it as far as Fenny Stratford, where the boatmen had stopped to eat their breakfast on that fateful day. We're approaching Fenny Stratford Lock, which has a swing bridge across the middle of it. Pool is on lock and bridge duty. We hope that you've enjoyed this vlog. It has been slightly different to normal. Let us know in the comments what you think going over the hedge means, and also what you think happened to John Twist. Don't forget, you can show that you've really enjoyed the vlog by giving us a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please do hit the subscribe button. It doesn't take too long for the lock to drain, and as soon as we're out of the lock, I'll head for the services point. We're dropping off a bag of rubbish here. If you'd like to know when we post our next vlog, ding that bell icon as well, and you'll get notifications. Join us next time on the final part of our journey through Milton Keynes in just one day. See you next time. Bye.